Xtalks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This food industry-focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to help keep you up to date.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Xtalks Food Podcast. I'm Sydney Perlmutter, Senior Food Industry Journalist and Webinar Moderator at xtalks.com, and this week I'm joined by Aisha Rashid and Vera Kovacevic. Thanks so much for coming today. So I'm going to start us off with an interesting sort of FDA update regarding genome-edited foods derived from plants. So the FDA, or the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, recently unveiled a new industry guidance for these foods. And this is a landmark guidance which aims to demystify the FDA's risk-based approach towards both genome-edited foods and all new plant varieties. And at the same time, the EU is also advancing in this domain, and it's poised to ease its genetically modified organisms or GMO legislations, marking a significant shift in global food regulation perspectives. So before I touch on this new guidance, let me just talk a little bit about what genome editing is. So it stands out as a cutting-edge technique that ingeniously introduces new traits into plants, and it also serves as a way of catering to the burgeoning needs of a growing global population. So the FDA articulates genome editing as a precise tool for enhancing plant traits, and this paves the way for the development of plants with improved nutritional profiles, resistance to pests and diseases, and adaptability to diverse environmental conditions. This innovative approach heralds a new chapter in agricultural development, promising to address some of the most pressing challenges in food security and environmental sustainability. So now we'll get into a little bit more about this FDA guidance. So the FDA's recent guidance document sheds light on the regulatory landscape for foods derived from genome-edited plants. It lays out the fundamental principles for ensuring the safety of these foods, of these innovative foods. The guidance introduces two voluntary processes through which companies can inform the FDA about their product safety measures involving new genome-edited plant varieties. Highlighting the importance of evaluating potential risks, the FDA's guidance encourages early consultation with the agency during the development of genome-edited foods derived from plants. And this proactive stance is designed to identify and mitigate any potential risks, ensuring that new products are safe for consumer consumption. The guidance offers a roadmap for developers, emphasizing the need for thorough safety assessments and proper labeling to inform consumers about the nature of these foods. This guidance is a beacon for the food industry, guiding developers through the regulatory maze and ensuring that genome-edited foods meet the highest safety standards. And in a bid to streamline the regulatory pathway, the FDA proposes a voluntary pre-market engagement for genome-edited foods. And this approach reaffirms the FDA's risk-based framework, extending it to encompass foods from genome-edited plants. So by introducing voluntary pre-market consultations and meetings, the FDA aims to facilitate the regulatory processes for biotechnology products, and this ensures the implementation of necessary safeguards and smoothing the path to market for these innovative foods. And recognizing the potential of genome editing to revolutionize the food industry, the FDA has also issued guidance specifically addressing small businesses. And this initiative seeks to engage small enterprises, including those contemplating the use of genome editing for developing new plant varieties for human or animal consumption. The FDA's call for information on engaging small businesses underscores the inclusive nature of this regulatory framework, aiming to foster innovation across the industry spectrum. So in terms of the future of genome-edited foods, with the FDA's adoption of a risk-based approach and the EU set to have some relaxation of GMO legislation, the horizon for genome-edited foods looks promising. It underscores the growing recognition and acceptance of these foods in the global market. Nonetheless, it remains imperative, though, for developers to prioritize safety and transparency, ensuring that consumers are adequately informed about these products. And the FDA's guidance is a significant stride towards balancing innovation with consumer protection, promoting a future where genome-edited foods play a pivotal role in addressing global food challenges. So, since I've got, some very excellent scientists with me, or science experts, I wanted to know if either of you, Vera or Aisha, had ever heard of genome edited foods. I'm sure you talk about genome editing, in science and pharma a decent amount, but have you heard about it with food?
Yes, for sure. I think it's part of the high school or even elementary school curriculum now here in Ontario, where students learn about, genome editing that can be done to foods. And they learn about like genetically modified organisms as well, which is essentially the same thing, right? Aisha, GMO and genetically edited foods, it's the same concept, right?
Yeah, I would think so. Genome editing, I think, is referring to new technologies that are more precise in how they genetically modify the organism in question. So I'm assuming or thinking that this might refer to new technologies like CRISPR, since that is the kind of poster child genome editing tool right now. So I think, you're right, Vera. GMOs have been around for a long time, but I think the technologies are just getting better and changing to be more precision oriented. And so that's why maybe the terminology is changing a bit to call them genome edited foods. But essentially the idea is the same, where you're basically either introducing or editing genes within a food product in this case to either enhance certain traits. So yeah, I think this is very exciting. I've heard rumblings of genome editing within the food space because Sydney, you talk a lot about food tech, and so definitely that's been sort of a theme creeping up, or a trend creeping up in food tech for sure. And I'm very actually happy to see the FDA issuing this guidance and to sort of guide the industry in terms of, okay, this technology is here and there's going to be eventual adoption of it. So let's be prepared and, consult with us. And so I think it's good that the FDA is being proactive about it. In terms of public reception, it will be interesting because there's been a lot of stigma around GMOs in general. And then when you introduce something like genome editing, it's, a lot of kind of probably fear mongering might happen. But I think since genetic technologies have been around for a while, maybe the public may be more open to it. And the fact that you have the FDA involved. So I think, yeah.
And do you guys think that genome edited plants, this is just talking about plant derived foods, so I'm assuming mostly, produce, but do you think that these, foods are sort of the antithesis of organic foods?
I'm just looking it up now. Are GMOs considered organic products? And according to the USDA, they're not. So it says here in this document that I just pulled up that the use of genetic engineering or genetically modified organisms, GMOs, is prohibited in organic products. So that means that an organic farmer can't plant GMO seeds, an organic cow can't eat GMO alfalfa or corn, and an organic soup producer can't use any GMO products, which I was surprised to actually learn that. I wasn't aware.
Yeah. And I wonder how many people who eat organic do so, just to avoid GMOs or these genetically edited foods because they are fearful of, something. And I also wonder, how easy it will be to educate people on these, genome edited foods, just based on the history that people have had with GMOs.
Humans over thousands of years have been artificially selecting for certain plant traits, and that is artificial selection. Mm-hmm. And new plant species have even arisen from that over time, right?
Evolution. Mm-hmm.
Evolution, yeah. And artificial selection is a thing. And whether you're doing it over 1,000 years in a field or you're doing it in one day in a lab is not a big difference. Like, you're still changing the DNA of the plant, right? Whether it was done over several millennia or whether it was done in a day. I mean, it's essentially the same thing, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything to fear with GMOs. Like, that's my personal opinion. I'm sure many people would or may disagree. But I'm glad that the FDA released this guidance. And from looking at the guidance, Sydney, when I downloaded it, it's heavily based on like food safety, which makes me feel like they did this because there is a real concern. People are afraid of eating GMO food or now genome edited food, right? So the FDA is taking more of like a food safety approach here in this guidance. I didn't see much information about like labeling because maybe that's more for future use. Like once more of these foods become approved and widely available, I'm sure they're going to discuss like a plan for how to label these foods. But I'm really glad to see that the FDA kind of really emphasized safety in their guidance document. And I'm thinking they did that for a reason, right?
Yeah, I think people's reasons for choosing organic foods differ. Some may, I think conventionally the idea has been to avoid like the addition of preservatives or pesticides, but GMOs are part of that as well, which actually I didn't really think so. Maybe I was just so accustomed to a lot of our foods being GMO now, but yeah, and so actually looking up, the actual, differences, GMO is the introduction of an actual of a piece of a gene. However, genome editing, again, is more precise. It will actually target and you're editing the gene that's already present in the organism. So that's like the distinction. But at the end, yes, you are modifying an organism genetically. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things move in the future in terms of how many producers adopt genome editing. And there's actually more confidence with genome editing versus inserting a gene via, let's say, a viral vector, because you have some concerns or considerations around that in terms of random integration events. Is your gene going to be inserted next to certain genes that, like promoters of certain genes that might be, cause it to be overexpressed and things like that. But technologies like CRISPR are, again, at the forefront in biotech, pharma, and now food as well, for good reason, because again, you get more precision-based genomic editing or transformation.
I knew I would learn so much from both of you. Thank you for those inputs. And I'll just round out by saying, it's very hard to find any food, at the grocery store that hasn't been processed, edited in some way, shape, or form. So, I mean, unless you are growing and controlling every part of the, food chain, then you're bound to be eating something that is somewhat processed or that you may feel slightly uncomfortable with. But I'm with you guys. I think it's safe. I think we've been eating this stuff for years, and maybe we don't know the ramifications of everything, but I think that for the most part, with GMOs, I think people will certainly always have their opinions, but if the FDA considers them safe, I think they'll continue to be consumed. And we'll see where genome edited foods go. And on a very similar wavelength, though, maybe taking it a step further, I can't believe we had not previously talked about this on another episode of a podcast, but we'll talk about the top 8 American foods that are banned in other countries. Maybe genome edited foods will be on this list one day, but they are not for now. So let's get into this list. The first one that we'll talk about is instant stuffing and mashed potatoes. Seems relatively, tame, right? But things like stuffing and mashed potatoes are so easy to make them in 5 minutes, these mixes. But these mixes contain preservatives like BHA and BHT, which have raised concerns due to suspicions of potential carcinogenic properties and their potential to hinder blood clotting. And same goes for instant mashed potatoes, which often can contain BHA to keep it from spoiling on the the shelf. So consequently, these preservatives have been banned in the UK, Japan, and other European nations. Second on the list is Skittles. We've talked about Skittles before, potential Skittles ban, but eating Skittles, while it can be nostalgic, you may also be partaking, though, in a handful of food additives that have been banned in numerous other countries. Skittles contain both yellow 5 and yellow 6, which are artificial food dyes that have raised red flags due to their potential adverse effects. And some research has even found possible correlation between yellow 5 and heightened hyperactivity in children, while rat studies exploring yellow 6 have uncovered potential links to tumors in the testes and adrenal glands. And that's why a few European countries have completely outlawed the use of yellow 5 and yellow 6. Next on the list, another sweet, Twinkies and Little Debbie's Swiss rolls. So delicious. And these popular American desserts also feature yellow 5 as well as red 40. And while these dyes have gained approval within the EU, they must be accompanied by cautionary labels indicating their potential to trigger adverse health effects in children. So think about potentially, I would think about cigarette cartons with warnings about the adverse effects of cigarettes. I don't think they're as shocking as you would find them on these Twinkies and Little Debbie rolls, but that's sort of what my mind came to. So unfortunately, these dyes are often in food products intended for infants and young children, but no precautionary labeling is mandated domestically in the US. Countries like Austria, Finland, and Norway have banned Twinkies completely. Next on the list is Pillsbury biscuits. You can enjoy the freshly baked biscuits within minutes with Pillsbury, but it's important to note that these baked goods contain partially hydrogenated soybean oil, which is a trans fat that has been linked to heart disease. In addition to pre-made dough, partially hydrogenated soybean oil can also be found in baked goods, coffee creamers, margarine, microwave popcorn, potato chips, and packaged snacks, among others. 5 on the list is bread with potassium bromate. Now, potassium bromate finds its way into bread dough to enhance its structural integrity, yielding a more substantial rise, cutting down baking time, and imparting a pristine white color to the final loaves. But this chemical is also associated with adverse health effects, including cancer, impairment of the nervous system, and damage to the kidneys. And while potassium bromate has been banned in various countries, such as the UK, here in Canada, and Peru, it remains prevalent in numerous American bread variants, including bagel chips, rolls, and even breadcrumbs. 6th on the list is high fructose corn syrup. It's derived from a blend of pure fructose and sugar. The sweetening agent has been associated with an array of health concerns, including obesity and type 2 diabetes. It can be found in a wide spectrum of products, ranging from beverages to cereals and ice cream, and many others. And while no country has implemented an outright ban on this sweetener, certain measures have been taken in the UK and several European countries, involving product restrictions and the imposition of quota limitations. 7th on the list is American pork. In the US, cuts of pork tend to be much larger than it is in other parts of the world, and that's because American pork contains growth hormones. One notable growth hormone, ractopamine, often employed in pig farming, has been banned in numerous countries. Though research concerning the potential effects of ractopamine consumption on human health is somewhat limited, certain studies have found a correlation between this growth hormone and an increase in heart rate. And interestingly, the US is one of the few remaining countries permitting the use of this hormone in their agricultural processes. And lastly on the list, another meat, chlorinated chicken. In the US, the practice of washing chicken in chlorine is done to mitigate the potential spread of foodborne illness, particularly salmonella. It's not just used to wash chicken either, though. Chlorine can be found in produce, canned vegetables, other meats, and many baked goods. And this food safety approach is prohibited in the UK and in the EU due to concerns about association with unhygienic farming methods. So we covered plenty of foods, American foods that are banned in other countries. I want to ask you, if any of them in particular stood out to you, if you were sort of surprised about certain ingredients that are contained within some of these foods, if it will change your opinions about eating these foods. I want to know what you guys think.
Yeah, so funny that you asked that, because the last one on the list, the chlorinated chicken, I was like, what is happening here? Like washing chicken in chlorine as a food safety measure. To me, that's quite unique. It was very surprising. It just added another unexpected layer to my understanding of like how food is processed and treated to ensure safety. I understand that why there would be some controversy surrounding chlorinated chicken, and just like calling it that way, chlorinated chicken, that's just, kind of concerning, like what that is. But yeah, that one was the most interesting one on the list, just because I've never even heard of that practice being done to meat ever before.
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting one. And then, yeah, I didn't know that was a practice either. And the fact that, it's prohibited because it brings to question how the chickens are raised, that you have to chlorinate them. So it's like, oh boy, a lot of problems there. So that was surprising to me. The other one that I didn't know about was potassium bromate. I had no idea that finds its way into breads, and how it has negative health effects, so potentially carcinogenic. So that was pretty surprising. And the other foods, oh my God, they're just so iconically American. It's like your Twinkies and Pillsbury, all this stuff that we grew up seeing and being inundated, with ads for them. It's insane. It's just, I'm happy to say that I did finally give up on Twinkies. Kidding. But yeah, it's like all of these things that were so normalized, at least for me growing up. It's insane to think, how other countries view these foods, and for rightful reasons, in terms of the potentially harmful effects they have. And yet they are a staple almost, and a mainstay, it seems, in the U.S. market. So it really goes to show how, the U.S. market, or what it consists of, which is, yeah, I'm just flabbergasted.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about, in previous episodes, foods that are banned in the U.S. And that may still be around in Europe. And the difference that I was noticing between, American foods banned in the EU or other countries, and foods that are banned in the U.S. has more to do with, perception of safety, and maybe like a little bit too out there. And what I mean by that are foods like haggis, your classic Scottish dish made from, I think, intestine or it contains some sort of animal intestine, and that's banned in the U.S. And it's such a departure from the items on this list, just because even though it may, it's safe to consume, I think, if cooked properly, we just have or the U.S. has a perception of it that they don't want to, it's not allowed.
That list, and I think that list was more comprised of like culturally, culture specific foods that the U.S. Consumer and producers are not really familiar or well acquainted with. And so because of that, they're like, oh no, we're going to stay away from it because we don't understand it. This is not, we don't understand this food, rather than there being like an actual safety concern. It's probably just around how to, just not having the knowledge in terms of how to handle the food and how to, produce it, package it, and market it, maybe even, right? Like, so it's, yeah, that's a good point. A very interesting sort of comparison between the foods banned in the U.S. versus other countries. And other countries seem to have more of a health-specific focus, evidence-based, looking at the studies, looking at specific compounds in the foods and why and how they may be harmful to human health, versus the U.S. where it's like, yeah, we just don't understand this culturally specific food, it seems.
Yeah. And another thing to add, it wasn't just the culturally specific food, it was also like a lot of ethical reasons behind that culturally specific food, right? So for example, the beluga caviar, right? That was banned in the U.S. because of overfishing of that fish that makes that caviar. And then there was...
Is it banned in the EU as well, or?
Perhaps.
Okay.
And then the sea turtles, banned in the US again. I mean, that's obviously like an ethical reason under the Endangered Species Act. And then the Kinder Surprise chocolate eggs that Sydney talked about, also banned in the US for safety, but also ethical reasons, like you shouldn't mix little toys and food.
Like a choking hazard with the toys.
Yeah, so, and then shark fins, also banned in the US, but that's also like a cultural type of food in other countries, but I think also banned for ethical reasons as well. Yeah. So yeah, interesting how these different like regulations and like the emphasis that different countries have.
I even wonder, like, how concerned are like actual U.S. producers about endangered species? It's all business for the U.S. So I think this is because of pressure, probably by animal welfare groups in the U.S. We know that they have like a lot of influence, and probably their work over the years has led to protection of these endangered species. But because I don't really see U.S. producers, not being so ethically inclined enough to, just not have these foods and market them, I think. Or maybe there's not enough money in them. So I can't speak to the reasons per se, but it's interesting for sure, yeah.
Well, that made me think, I mean, food tourism is such a big aspect of just travel in general. And I think if all foods were allowed in all countries, what would be the point of traveling to different countries and getting to try their various cuisines? And then I'm also thinking, which approach, is the US's approach, or is the EU's approach, or other countries' approach, which is the correct one? Is there one that's more correct? And, who sort of ultimately is the decider of that? I guess really it's the, regulatory agencies. It's the EU, it's the European Food Safety Authority. It's the FDA who gets to decide these things. And I think decades and generations of culture and influence have sort of, gotten to where we are now in various countries. But yeah, I mean, I can't say who's more correct. I mean, I agree, with the ethical bans when it comes to, shark fins, beluga, caviar, all of that. But then, I'm more skeptical when it's culturally specific foods that don't harm ecosystems or anything like that. That just seems more out of ignorance. And then I am ashamed of the FDA for, including so many chemicals and dyes, especially things that aren't necessary to the integrity of the foods, like dyes and preservatives, for mindlessly including those in these staple foods, especially the ones targeted at children for years. But I think the good news is that consumers and just the industry alike is becoming more aware of these things and are trying to find alternatives to food dyes that are safe and don't, have as many health risks. So time will tell. But I'm very glad we got to look at this list and, question what chlorinated chicken is. All right, well, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Food Podcast. If you like today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
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 Thanks for listening to the Xtalks Food Industry Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find Xtalks on social media, email podcast@xtalks.com, or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.